The champagne glass trembled in my hand as Ryan's voice cut through the elegant chatter of the Riverside Country Club like a blade through silk. His words hung in the perfumed air of the engagement party, each syllable designed to wound with surgical precision. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ladies and gentlemen, my older brother announced, his arm wrapped possessively around his fiancée Chloe's waist. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate our engagement. It means the world to us to have our family and closest friends witness this moment. His eyes found mine across the crowded room, and his smile turned predatory. Well, most of our family anyway. Some people are still figuring out how to be successful enough to truly belong at gatherings like this. The crowd shifted uncomfortably as Ryan's gaze lingered on me. I stood alone near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Columbia River, my simple black dress a stark contrast to the designer gowns surrounding me. Margaret Harper, our mother, shot me a disapproving look that I'd grown accustomed to over 32 years of being the family disappointment. You know, Ryan continued, his voice gaining confidence from the alcohol in the captive audience. My little sister Natalie here has been struggling to find her place in the world, still living in that tiny apartment downtown, still chasing dreams that never seemed to materialize. He raised his glass higher, and I noticed how Chloe seemed to shrink beside him, her emerald eyes darting nervously between us. But that's okay, Nat. Not everyone can be a regional sales director for a Fortune 500 company by 30. The assembled guests murmured politely, unsure whether to laugh or look away. Derek Williams, Ryan's best friend and faithful enabler, chuckled loudly enough to encourage others. I took a measured sip of champagne, tasting nothing but the bitter familiarity of public humiliation. In fact, Ryan pressed on, emboldened by what he mistook for my silence as defeat. I was telling Chloe just yesterday how worried we all are about you. Mom, Dad, and I have been discussing maybe setting up a little fund to help you get back on your feet. You know, maybe find you something more stable than whatever it is you're doing with that research stuff nobody understands. Robert Harper, our father, shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. He'd learned long ago that challenging Ryan's need to dominate every room was a losing battle. Margaret nodded approvingly, as if Ryan's public degradation of me was somehow an act of family charity. So here's to Chloe and me, Ryan concluded, pulling his fiancée closer, and to building a life with someone who shares your ambitions and achievements, someone who elevates you rather than holds you back. His toast was met with hesitant applause and the uncomfortable silence that follows when someone has gone too far. I remained perfectly still, watching the performance with the detached interest of a scientist observing a particularly aggressive specimen. Ryan had always needed an audience for his cruelty, and tonight's engagement party provided the perfect stage. What he didn't realize was that I'd been expecting this moment for weeks. Chloe Peterson caught my eye from across the room, and for just an instant, I saw something unexpected there. Not pity, which I'd grown used to from Ryan's social circle, but genuine discomfort at her fiancé's behavior. She whispered something in his ear, and he waved her off dismissively. Anyway, Ryan said, finally lowering his glass, enough about family charity cases. Let's celebrate what really matters tonight. The party resumed its forced merriment, but the damage was done. Small clusters of guests glanced in my direction with expressions ranging from sympathy to embarrassment. I recognized several faces from Ryan's corporate world, people who'd known our family for years and had watched this dynamic play out repeatedly. Margaret approached me with her practiced socialite smile, the one she reserved for managing family embarrassments in public. Natalie dear, perhaps you should thank your brother for his generous offer. It really is thoughtful of him to want to help you find more suitable employment. I asked quietly, setting down my untouched champagne flute on a nearby table. How thoughtful. Before she could respond, I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble floor with steady precision. Behind me I heard Derek Williams make some joke about knowing when you're beat, followed by Ryan's booming laughter. The cool Portland evening air hit my face as I stepped onto the club's wraparound porch. The Columbia River stretched out below, its dark waters reflecting the city lights like scattered diamonds. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through several missed calls from Dr. Marcus Chen, my colleague and one of the few people who understood the true nature of my work. Natalie. Chloe's voice startled me from behind. She'd followed me outside, her designer heels wobbling slightly on the stone steps. I'm so sorry about that. Ryan gets carried away sometimes when he's had a few drinks. I turned to face her, studying the woman my brother had chosen to marry. Chloe Peterson worked as a pediatric nurse at Pacific Northwest Medical Center, a detail Ryan rarely mentioned since it didn't align with his image of success. She was beautiful in an understated way, with auburn hair and intelligent green eyes that seemed genuinely troubled by the evening's events. Does he, I asked, get carried away, or is this just who he is? Chloe wrapped her arms around herself, the October chill cutting through her elegant silk dress. He's under a lot of pressure at work, the promotion, the wedding planning, trying to prove himself to his family. She paused, seeming to realize how her excuses sounded. That doesn't make it right though. No, I agreed. It doesn't. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, two women bound by their connection to Ryan Harper, but separated by vastly different perspectives on his character. I found myself genuinely curious about what Chloe saw in my brother beyond his polished exterior and corporate success. What kind of research do you do? She asked suddenly. Ryan mentioned it, but he's always vague about the details. Medical research, I said simply. Pediatric cardiology specifically. I focus on developing less invasive surgical techniques for children with congenital heart defects. Chloe's eyes widened. That's incredible. Do you work at OHSU? Among other places, I replied, deliberately vague. Ryan had trained his social circle to dismiss my work as unimportant, and I'd learned it was easier to let them maintain their assumptions than to constantly correct their misconceptions. I work in pediatrics at Pacific Northwest Medical, Chloe said, her professional interest clearly piqued. We see a lot of cardiac cases. The work you're doing must save so many children's lives. Before I could respond, Derek Williams appeared in the doorway, his face flushed with alcohol and self-importance. There you are, Chloe. Ryan's looking for you. Time for the cake-cutting ceremony. He glanced at me dismissively. Natalie, great seeing you. Don't be a stranger, all right? Maybe we'll see you at the wedding if things pick up for you by then. Chloe shot me an apologetic look as Derek escorted her back inside. I remained on the porch for several more minutes, processing the evening's events with the analytical mind that had served me well throughout my career. Ryan's performance had been particularly vicious tonight, even by his standards. The engagement had clearly amplified his need to establish dominance, to prove to his fiancée and their social circle that he stood at the top of the Harper family hierarchy. What he didn't know was that his assumptions about my life were not just wrong, they were spectacularly, almost comically inaccurate. And tomorrow, when Chloe Peterson returned to her job at Pacific Northwest Medical Center, she was going to discover exactly how wrong they were. I pulled my phone from my purse and typed a quick message to Dr. Chen. The dedication ceremony is still scheduled for tomorrow at 10, correct? His response came immediately. Of course. The press conference is at 11. Are you ready for this? Ready. I smiled for the first time that evening, a genuine expression that felt foreign after hours of maintaining polite composure. After 32 years of being dismissed, underestimated, and publicly humiliated by my own family, I was more than ready. The drive back to my downtown apartment gave me time to reflect on the path that had brought me to this moment. Ryan saw my modest living situation as evidence of failure, but the truth was far more complex. My resources had been invested elsewhere, channeled into research, education, and a vision that extended far beyond the superficial markers of success that impressed my brother. My apartment building's parking garage was nearly empty at this late hour. As I rode the elevator to the 15th floor, I thought about Chloe's genuine interest in my work. For just a moment tonight, I'd glimpsed the woman beneath Ryan's carefully curated narrative about his perfect fiancé. She worked with sick children, dedicated her career to healing rather than profit margins. What would she think when she learned the truth about the Harper family's actual dynamics? The elevator doors opened to reveal the hallway leading to my apartment. 15C had been my home for 3 years, a decision Ryan interpreted as lack of ambition rather than strategic choice. The location offered a 15-minute commute to my primary research facility and easy access to the 3 hospitals where I maintained active consulting relationships. Inside, my living space reflected the same practical approach that governed most of my decisions. Clean lines, functional furniture, and walls lined with medical journals and research papers, rather than the expensive art that decorated Ryan's suburban mansion. A large desk dominated one corner, covered with grant applications, research proposals, and correspondence from colleagues around the world. I kicked off my heels and settled at the desk, pulling up the presentation materials for tomorrow's dedication ceremony. The slides told a story that would have been impossible for Ryan to imagine, a narrative of innovation, recognition, and achievement that operated in spheres far removed from his corporate environment. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your brother's offer tonight was generous, Nat. I hope you'll consider it seriously. Perhaps it's time to be more realistic about your future. I archived the message without responding, a habit I'd developed over years of similar communication. Margaret Harper had never understood that her definition of success was not universal, that her younger daughter's choices represented deliberation rather than desperation. The clock on my desk showed 11. In less than 11 hours, Chloe Peterson would arrive at Pacific Northwest Medical Center for her morning shift. She'd walk through the familiar corridors, greeting colleagues and preparing for another day of caring for young patients with serious medical conditions. And at some point during that routine morning, she would pass a particular corridor she'd walked hundreds of times before. But tomorrow, she would notice something new, something that would fundamentally alter her understanding of the Harper family and everything Ryan had told her about his unsuccessful sister. I opened my laptop and reviewed the final details one more time. The Harper Pediatric Cardiac Wing had been under construction for 18 months, funded by a combination of private donations, research grants, and my own contributions from consulting fees and patent licensing. The dedication ceremony would formally open the facility, introducing advanced surgical suites, designed specifically for the minimally invasive procedures I'd developed over the past decade.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The irony was perfect. Ryan's fiancée worked in the very hospital that would soon display the Harper name, but she would learn that the honor belonged to his sister, not him. The woman he dismissed as a failure had not only achieved recognition in her field, but had literally built a legacy that would save children's lives for generations. Chen had coordinated the media coverage, ensuring that tomorrow's announcement would reach the medical journals and professional networks that mattered most. By evening, colleagues from Boston to Berlin would know about the Harper Wing's opening and the innovative techniques it represented. But the most important audience would be a pediatric nurse with green eyes and auburn hair, walking to work on a Tuesday morning, completely unprepared for what she was about to discover about her fiancé's family. I closed the laptop and prepared for bed, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. Ryan's cruelty tonight had been the final catalyst, the last push I needed to stop hiding my achievements from a family that had never bothered to ask about them anyway. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the Harper Pediatric Cardiac Wing, but for the complex dynamics that had defined the Harper family for over 3 decades. My brother had built his identity on being the successful one, the achiever, the son who made his parents proud. He was about to learn that success could be measured in ways he'd never considered, and that the sister he'd dismissed as a failure had been quietly building something far more significant than a corporate title or suburban mansion. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Harper Pediatric Cardiac Wing, as I adjusted my navy blazer one final time. At precisely 9:45 a.m., I stood in the gleaming new facility that represented 5 years of planning, fundraising, and relentless dedication to advancing pediatric cardiac care. The smell of fresh paint and new equipment filled the air, mixed with the subtle antiseptic scent that marked every medical facility. Marcus Chen approached with his characteristic calm efficiency, clipboard in hand and an expression that managed to convey both professional satisfaction and personal pride. We had worked together for over 8 years, first as colleagues, then as research partners, and finally as co-founders of the innovative program that made this wing possible. The press is set up in Conference Room A, he informed me, his voice carrying the slight accent that reflected his family's Taiwanese heritage. Channel 8 News, the Portland Tribune, and Medical Innovation Today all confirmed. Rodriguez from Hospital Administration will handle the introductions. I nodded, reviewing my prepared remarks one final time. The dedication ceremony had been scheduled for maximum impact during the hospital's busiest morning shift change. Nurses, doctors, and support staff would witness the unveiling of the wing that would revolutionize pediatric cardiac care in the Pacific Northwest. Any word from the Harper family? Dr. Chen asked, with barely concealed amusement. We'd discussed the invitation I'd extended to my parents and brother, knowing full well that Ryan's corporate schedule rarely accommodated events that didn't directly benefit his career advancement. Radio silence, I replied. Although I suspect that's about to change. Through the window I could see Pacific Northwest Medical Center's main entrance bustling with the controlled chaos of a major hospital beginning another day. Somewhere in that building, Chloe Peterson was starting her shift, completely unaware that her understanding of the Harper family was about to undergo a seismic shift. Helen Rodriguez, the hospital's chief administrator, joined us in the corridor. A woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair, and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades navigating complex medical bureaucracy, she commanded immediate respect from staff and visitors alike. "Dr. Harper," she said warmly, "I can't tell you how excited we are about this day. The Harper Wing represents everything we strive for: innovation, compassion, and genuine impact on patient outcomes." She paused, checking her watch. "The ribbon cutting is scheduled for 10:30, followed by the press conference. Are you ready?" I'd been ready for years. Every late night spent writing grant proposals, every conference presentation defending unconventional surgical approaches, every moment of doubt when the medical establishment questioned a young woman's revolutionary techniques. All of it had led to this morning. "Let's begin," I said. We walked toward the wing's main entrance, where a small crowd had already gathered. Hospital staff lined the corridor, many holding coffee cups and wearing expressions of curiosity. Several had worked with me during the wing's development phase, watching the transformation of empty space into state-of-the-art surgical suites. The ribbon stretched across the entrance doors, royal blue silk that matched the color scheme I'd chosen for the wing's interior design. Behind those doors lay 6 surgical suites, equipped with the most advanced pediatric cardiac technology available anywhere in the world, each one designed to accommodate the minimally invasive techniques that had become my signature contribution to the field. Tom Bradley, my former colleague who had initially questioned my unconventional methods, stood near the back of the crowd with a smile that acknowledged how wrong he'd been about my potential. Our professional relationship had evolved from skepticism to collaboration, as my techniques proved their effectiveness in case after case. "Ladies and gentlemen," Rodriguez began, her voice carrying clearly through the corridor, "today marks a historic moment for Pacific Northwest Medical Center, and for pediatric cardiac care throughout our region." She gestured toward me with genuine warmth. "It's my privilege to introduce Natalie Harper, whose groundbreaking research and unwavering commitment to improving outcomes for children with congenital heart defects has made this facility possible." The applause was immediate and sustained, coming not just from the gathered crowd but from nurses and doctors who had witnessed my work firsthand. I stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment and the years of preparation that had brought me here. "Thank you," I began, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "When I first proposed developing less invasive surgical techniques for pediatric cardiac patients, many people told me it was impossible. They said the procedures were too complex, the risks too great, and the potential benefits too uncertain to justify the investment." I paused, letting my gaze move across the faces in the crowd. These were the people who understood the real meaning of success: nurses who stayed late to comfort frightened children, surgeons who dedicated their careers to saving tiny hearts, administrators who fought insurance companies and budget constraints to provide the best possible care. But what they didn't understand, I continued, was that impossibility is just another word for a problem nobody has solved yet. Every child who undergoes surgery in this wing will benefit from techniques that reduce trauma, speed recovery, and improve long-term outcomes. That's not just medical advancement, that's hope made tangible. The crowd listened intently as I outlined the wing's capabilities and the research foundation that supported its innovative approach. Near the back I noticed several people holding phones, obviously recording the ceremony for social media or personal documentation. Dr. Chen stepped forward with the ceremonial scissors, an ornate pair donated by the hospital's board of directors. "Dr. Harper," he said formally, "would you do the honors?" I accepted the scissors, their weight surprising in my hands. Behind me, the doors bore a polished bronze plaque that read, "The Harper Pediatric Cardiac Wing, dedicated to innovation, compassion and the future of cardiac care. Natalie Harper, founder and director." The ribbon separated cleanly, falling away to reveal the entrance to the facility I'd dreamed of building since my residency. The crowd applauded again, and camera flashes captured the moment from multiple angles. Several staff members immediately moved toward the doors, eager to tour the new facilities. But my attention was drawn to a commotion near the elevator bank. A familiar voice, raised in confusion and growing agitation, cut through the celebratory noise. "What do you mean, the Harper Wing? Which Harper?" Ryan's voice carried clearly down the corridor, and I turned to see him striding toward our group with characteristic determination. He wore his best corporate armor, a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, paired with the confident expression of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Behind him, looking increasingly uncomfortable, walked Chloe Peters. She wore her nursing scrubs, and the slightly dazed expression of someone whose worldview was rapidly crumbling. Her eyes moved from the bronze plaque to me, then back to the plaque, as if she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Natalie, Ryan's voice cracked slightly on my name. He stopped about 10 feet away, his gaze moving from me to Dr. Rodriguez to the newly opened wing entrance. What is this? Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward with the polished professionalism that came from years of managing delicate situations. Mr. Harper, I presume? I'm Dr. Helen Rodriguez, Chief Administrator. We're celebrating the opening of your sister's pediatric cardiac wing. My sister's what? Ryan's voice rose dangerously, attracting stares from hospital staff and lingering ceremony attendees. Chloe moved closer to him, her nursing training probably recognizing the signs of someone approaching emotional crisis. The Harper Pediatric Cardiac Wing, I said calmly, finally addressing my brother directly. Named in honor of the Harper family's contribution to advancing pediatric cardiac care. I paused, enjoying the moment more than I probably should have. My contribution, specific. Ryan's face cycled through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally something approaching panic. He looked at Chloe, who was staring at the bronze plaque with growing understanding. You work here, he said to her, as if just remembering this fact. You knew about this. I knew about the new wing opening, Chloe replied quietly, but I didn't know. She gestured helplessly toward me. Ryan, you said she was unsuccessful. You said she couldn't hold down a steady job. The corridor had grown quiet, as staff members realized they were witnessing a family drama unfold. Dr. Chen moved subtly closer to me, ready to intervene if the situation escalated beyond uncomfortable into genuinely disruptive. There must be some mistake, Ryan said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in corporate meetings. Natalie, what kind of game are you playing here? No game, I replied. Just the result of 15 years of medical training, 8 years of research, and 5 years of developing the surgical techniques that make this wing possible. I gestured toward the open doors behind me. Would you like a tour? I'd be happy to explain how the equipment works. Chloe stepped forward, her nursing background clearly overriding her personal confusion. Dr. Harper, she said formally, I've heard other staff members mention your techniques. The Johnson procedure, for patent ductus arteriosus repair. That's yours, isn't it? Among others, I confirm. We've successfully reduced surgical trauma by approximately 60%, while improving long-term outcomes across multiple cardiac anomalies. Oh my God, Chloe whispered, her hand covering her mouth. You're that Dr. Harper, the cardiac surgeon everyone talks about, the one who's revolutionizing pediatric care. Ryan looked between us with growing desperation. Chloe, what are you talking about? Natalie's not a surgeon, she barely finished college. I finished college, summa cum laude, I corrected gently. Then medical school at Johns Hopkins, residency at Boston Children's Hospital, and fellowship in pediatric cardiac surgery at Texas Children's Hospital. I've been practicing here for 8 years. The words hung in the air like a diagnosis nobody wanted to hear. Ryan's carefully constructed narrative about his unsuccessful sister was dissolving in real time, and he seemed unable to process the implications. Rodriguez stepped smoothly into the awkward silence, her administrative instincts, recognizing the need to redirect attention away from the family drama unfolding in her hospital corridor. Perhaps we should move to the press conference, she suggested diplomatically. The media representatives are waiting, and we have several other dedication events scheduled throughout the morning. Ryan's face had gone pale beneath his expensive tan, and I watched him struggle to reconcile the evidence before him with 32 years of assumptions about his younger sister's capabilities. His eyes darted between the bronze plaque, the gathered medical staff, and Chloe's increasingly troubled expression. Press conference, he repeated weakly. Channel 8 News, Portland Tribune, Medical Innovation Today, Dr. Chen listed matter-of-factly. Harper's work has attracted national attention in the medical community. The techniques she's developed are being implemented in pediatric cardiac programs across the country. Chloe moved closer to the bronze plaque, running her fingers along the raised lettering of my name. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she spoke. Ryan, how did you not know about this? Your own sister is famous in pediatric cardiac surgery. The nurses here talk about her techniques constantly. She's saved hundreds of children's lives. That's impossible, Ryan insisted, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. Natalie's never mentioned any of this. She lives in a tiny apartment downtown. She drives a 5-year-old Honda. If she were some famous surgeon, wouldn't we know? I exchanged a glance with Dr. Chen, who was clearly enjoying this revelation as much as I was. We'd discussed my family's willful ignorance many times over the years, particularly during the challenging periods when their dismissive comments had threatened to undermine my confidence. Ryan, I said quietly, when was the last time you asked me about my work? Not made assumptions, not offered unsolicited advice, but actually asked what I do for a living. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The uncomfortable truth was that Ryan had never shown genuine interest in anyone's life, but his own. His knowledge of my career consisted entirely of his own interpretations, filtered through his narrow definition of success. But the apartment, he said desperately. The car. You live like someone who's struggling financially. I live like someone who prioritizes research funding over material possessions, I corrected. Every consulting fee, every patent licensing payment, every speaking engagement, honorarium, gets reinvested into advancing pediatric cardiac care. That's what building a legacy actually looks like. Tom Bradley approached our group with a broad smile, apparently oblivious to the family tension crackling through the air. Natalie, congratulations again on this incredible achievement. I have to admit, when you first proposed your modified surgical approach during grand rounds 5 years ago, I thought you were too ambitious. Seeing these results proves how wrong I was. Thank you, Tom, I replied warmly. Your support during the clinical trials made all the difference, especially when the Medical Review Board questioned our unconventional protocols. Medical Review Board, Chloe asked, her nursing background clearly helping her understand the significance. You had to defend your surgical techniques to the hospital's medical board? Multiple times, Dr. Chen interjected.
Dr. Harper's approaches were so innovative that traditional surgical committees needed extensive convincing before approving clinical trials. The data she presented was irrefutable, but changing established medical practices requires extraordinary persistence. Ryan stood frozen, watching this conversation unfold like a spectator at his own execution. Each detail about my professional achievements seemed to physically pain him, as if learning about my success somehow diminished his own accomplishments. Harper, called a voice from near the elevator bank. A woman in her 40s approached with a professional camera and press credentials hanging from her neck. I'm Jennifer Walsh from Medical Innovation Today. Could we get a few quotes about the wing's impact on treatment protocols? Of course, I replied, automatically shifting into the professional mode I'd developed during years of presenting research at medical conferences. The Harper wing represents a fundamental shift toward minimally invasive pediatric cardiac surgery. Our success rates show a 63% reduction in post-operative complications and a 47% decrease in average hospital stay duration. Jennifer Walsh scribbled notes rapidly while her photographer captured images of me standing beside the wing's entrance. And the financial impact on healthcare costs? Reduced hospital stays and fewer complications translate to approximately $30,000 in savings per patient, I explained. Across the projected annual caseload, we're looking at cost reductions exceeding $12 million annually while dramatically improving quality of life for our youngest patients. Ryan made a strangled sound that might have been surprise or dismay. $12 million in annual impact represented more than his entire corporate division generated in revenue, a fact that clearly hadn't escaped his notice. Dr. Harper, Jennifer continued, can you tell us about the personal motivation behind developing these techniques? What drove you to pursue such an ambitious research agenda? I paused, considering how much personal information to share with the media. The real answer involved years of feeling dismissed and undervalued by my own family, channeling that frustration into professional excellence that spoke louder than any corporate title or suburban mansion. Every child who undergoes cardiac surgery faces risks that adults can barely comprehend, I said instead. These procedures needed to be safer, less traumatic, more effective. When traditional approaches weren't sufficient, developing better techniques became not just a professional obligation but a moral imperative. Chloe stepped closer, her voice carrying a new note of respect that Ryan clearly noticed. Harper, as someone who works directly with these patients, I want to thank you. The difference your techniques make in recovery times and patient comfort is remarkable. The children and families you've helped can't adequately express their gratitude. That's very kind, I replied. But the real credit belongs to the entire cardiac team. Surgery is a collaborative effort, and the nurses, technicians, and support staff make these outcomes possible. Jennifer Walsh finished her notes and moved toward the press conference location, leaving our family group standing in the corridor amid the gradually dispersing crowd of hospital staff. The morning shift change was complete, and the normal bustle of hospital operations had resumed around us. Ryan hadn't spoken for several minutes, his expression cycling through emotions I'd rarely seen him display. Confusion, embarrassment, and something that might have been genuine remorse flickered across his features as he processed the magnitude of his miscalculation. "Natalie," he said finally, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone. "Why didn't you ever tell us about any of this?" The question hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. Years of accumulated hurt and disappointment had created a chasm in our relationship that couldn't be bridged with a single conversation, regardless of how dramatic the circumstance. "Tell you what exactly?" I asked. "About medical school, about my residence, about the research grants, the published papers, the speaking engagements at international conferences." "When would have been a good time to mention those things, Ryan?" He flinched at the quiet intensity in my voice. "I thought you were just working at some research job." "I didn't realize it was anything significant." "You didn't realize because you never asked," I replied. "For 8 years, every family gathering, every phone call, every interaction we've had, you've assumed I was failing at life based on your own narrow definition of success. When did you last ask me a single question about my actual work?" Chloe watched this exchange with growing discomfort, clearly beginning to understand the family dynamics she was marrying into. Her nursing experience had undoubtedly exposed her to many difficult family situations, but this one was becoming her personal reality. "Ryan," she said quietly, "your sister is literally famous in pediatric medicine. How could you not know that? How could your family not know that?" "Because they never wanted to know," I answered for him. "Success that doesn't fit their predetermined categories doesn't count." A cardiac surgeon who drives a Honda and lives in a downtown apartment can't possibly be successful by Harper family standards. Dr. Chen checked his watch and caught my attention. "Natalie, the press conference starts in 15 minutes. Should we head over?" I nodded, grateful for the professional obligation that provided a natural exit from this increasingly uncomfortable family confrontation. "Of course, Ryan, you and Chloe are welcome to attend if you're interested in learning more about the wing's capabilities." "Wait," Ryan said, his voice carrying a desperate edge. "This doesn't make sense. If you're some famous surgeon, why do Mom and Dad think you're unsuccessful? Why do they worry about you financially?" "Because I've never corrected their assumptions," I replied simply. "When someone is determined to see you as a failure, providing evidence to the contrary becomes exhausting. Eventually it's easier to let them believe what they want to believe." "But the engagement party," Chloe said suddenly, her eyes widening as she processed the implications. "Last night, when you humiliated her in front of everyone, she knew all of this was happening today. She knew about the dedication ceremony, the press coverage, everything." Ryan's face went white as the full scope of his miscalculation became clear. He'd chosen to publicly mock his sister on the eve of her greatest professional triumph, in front of his fiancée, who worked at the very hospital that would bear the Harper family name. "You let me make a fool of myself," he said, anger replacing embarrassment in his voice. "You could have said something, stopped me from embarrassing myself like that." "I let you reveal who you really are," I corrected. "Your words last night weren't about me, Ryan. They were about your need to diminish others in order to feel important. Learning about my actual achievements doesn't change that fundamental aspect of your character." The corridor around us had grown quiet as other hospital staff moved on to their morning responsibilities. Only a few people remained near the wing entrance, most of them preparing for the press conference or conducting informal tours of the new facilities. Dr. Harper, a young resident, approached hesitantly. "I'm Dr. Sarah Kim from the pediatric cardiac team. I wanted to thank you personally for this opportunity. Training in your surgical techniques has been the highlight of my residency program." "You're very welcome, Dr. Kim," I replied warmly. "Your performance during the clinical trials was excellent. You have a natural intuition for minimally invasive approaches." "Thank you," she said, beaming with pride. "Will you be conducting the Advanced Techniques workshop next month?" "Absolutely. We have participants coming from pediatric programs across the Pacific Northwest. It should be an excellent learning opportunity for everyone involved." Dr. Kim nodded enthusiastically and headed toward the elevators, leaving us once again in awkward family silence. Ryan watched her departure with obvious confusion, still struggling to reconcile this version of his sister with his preconceived notions. "Advanced Techniques workshop?" Chloe asked. "You teach other surgeons?" "Regularly," Dr. Chen answered for me. Harper's techniques are being adopted by pediatric cardiac programs nationwide. She conducts training workshops, lectures at medical conferences, and serves as a consulting surgeon for complex cases that other programs can't handle. Complex cases, Ryan repeated faintly, like, I considered whether to elaborate, then decided he might as well understand the full scope of what he'd dismissed so casually. Last month, I performed a complete aortic arch reconstruction on a 6-week-old infant. The referring hospital in Seattle said the case was inoperable. The baby is now thriving at home with his family. 6 weeks old, Chloe whispered. That's incredible. It's what we do, I said simply. Every case that other programs consider impossible becomes an opportunity to push the boundaries of what's possible in pediatric cardiac care. Ryan seemed to be struggling with basic comprehension, as if the cognitive dissonance between his assumptions and reality had short-circuited his ability to process new information. His corporate world dealt in quarterly profits and market share growth, concepts that seemed almost trivial compared to saving children's lives through innovative surgical techniques. Dr. Harper, Dr. Rodriguez approached our group again. We really should move to the press conference. The media representatives are set up and ready to begin. Of course, I agreed, then turned to Ryan and Chloe. You're both welcome to attend, but I understand if this is overwhelming. The press conference will focus on technical aspects of the surgical techniques and their broader implications for pediatric cardiac care. Chloe looked at Ryan, clearly torn between professional curiosity and personal loyalty. Her nursing background made the medical aspects genuinely interesting, but the family drama surrounding the revelations complicated her position significantly. I think we should go, she said quietly to Ryan. I want to understand what your sister has accomplished. This is important, Ryan. This is really important. Ryan nodded reluctantly, though he still looked shell-shocked by the morning's revelations. As we walked toward the conference room, I found myself wondering what the long-term implications of this confrontation would be for our family relationship. The Harper family dynamic had been built on certain assumptions about success, achievement, and worth that were now completely undermined. Ryan's identity as the successful sibling, our parents' disappointment in their youngest daughter, the entire narrative that had shaped our interactions for decades had been revealed as fundamentally flawed. But changing deeply embedded family patterns required more than a single dramatic revelation. Real transformation demanded sustained effort, genuine introspection, and the willingness to acknowledge years of harmful behavior. Whether Ryan possessed the emotional maturity for that kind of growth remained to be seen. The conference room buzzed with activity as media representatives prepared their equipment and hospital administrators finalized the presentation material. This was my moment, the culmination of years of work finally receiving the recognition it deserved. And for the first time in my adult life, my family would witness that recognition firsthand, forced to confront the reality of what their youngest member had accomplished while they weren't paying attention. The conference room filled rapidly with medical professionals, journalists, and hospital administrators as I took my place at the podium. The PowerPoint presentation displayed behind me showed before and after surgical images that demonstrated the dramatic improvements in patient outcomes achieved through my modified technique. Each slide represented years of meticulous research, countless hours in the operating room, and the kind of innovation that only emerged from absolute dedication to advancing medical science. Ryan and Chloe had taken seats in the back row, their body language revealing the tension that continued to simmer beneath the surface of their relationship. Chloe leaned forward with genuine professional interest, while Ryan sat rigid, with the posture of someone attending his own sentencing hearing. Dr. Rodriguez stepped to the microphone with the confidence of someone who had navigated countless media events throughout her administrative career. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for this historic moment in pediatric cardiac care. The Harper Pediatric Cardiac Wing represents not just a new facility, but a revolutionary approach to treating children with congenital heart defects. The assembled media representatives prepared their recording equipment while hospital staff filled the remaining seats. I recognized several faces from the pediatric department, colleagues who had witnessed the development of my techniques through years of collaborative effort and peer review. It's my privilege to introduce Dr. Natalie Harper, Dr. Rodriguez continued, whose pioneering research has fundamentally transformed how we approach minimally invasive cardiac surgery in pediatric populations. Harper's innovations have reduced surgical trauma, improved recovery times, and saved countless young lives not just here at Pacific Northwest Medical, but at pediatric cardiac programs worldwide. The applause that followed was warm and sustained, coming from people who understood the significance of medical breakthrough and the years of effort required to achieve such results. I stepped to the podium, feeling the familiar mixture of nervousness and excitement that accompanied presenting research findings to professional audiences. "Thank you, Dr. Rodriguez," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the room's sound system. "When we first proposed developing the Harper Wing 5 years ago, our goal was simple: create a facility specifically designed to support minimally invasive pediatric cardiac procedures that would reduce trauma, improve outcomes, and enhance quality of life for our youngest patients." I clicked to the next slide, showing comparative surgical images that illustrated the dramatic differences between traditional and modified approaches. Traditional pediatric cardiac surgery often requires significant chest incisions, prolonged recovery periods, and carries substantial risk of complication. Our modified techniques utilize precision instruments and advanced imaging to perform the same procedures through incisions that are 70% smaller. Jennifer Walsh from Medical Innovation Today raised her hand. "Dr. Harper, can you quantify the improvement in patient outcome?" "Certainly," I replied, advancing to a slide filled with statistical data. Our 5-year study involved over 800 pediatric patients with various congenital cardiac anomalies. Patients treated using our modified techniques showed a 63% reduction in postoperative complications, 47% shorter hospital stays, and 91% faster return to normal childhood activities. A murmur of appreciation rippled through the audience. These weren't just numbers to the medical professionals present. They represented hundreds of children returning home to their families weeks earlier than traditional surgery would have allowed. "Dr. Harper," called another journalist, "what was the inspiration for developing these techniques?" I paused, considering how much personal motivation to reveal in a professional setting. The real answer involved years of feeling overlooked and dismissed, channeling that frustration into medical innovation that would prove my worth beyond any doubt. "Every child who requires cardiac surgery faces risks that most adults can barely comprehend," I said instead. "Traditional techniques, while effective, imposed unnecessary trauma on developing bodies. When you're operating on a 6-pound infant with a heart the size of a walnut, every millimeter of precision matters. The techniques we've developed prioritize minimizing surgical trauma while maximizing therapeutic effectiveness." Dr. Chen stood at the side of the room, nodding approvingly as I fielded questions from the media. We had rehearsed this presentation multiple times, anticipating the kinds of inquiries that would arise from both medical professionals and general interest journalists. "Can you walk us through a typical procedure?" asked a reporter from Channel 8 News. I advanced to the next slide, showing the sophisticated imaging equipment that made precision surgery possible. Let's use patent ductus arteriosus repair as an example. This is a relatively common congenital heart defect, where a blood vessel that should close after birth remains open, forcing the heart to work harder than necessary. The slide showed detailed anatomical diagrams that illustrated both the defect and the surgical correction. Traditional repair requires opening the chest cavity through a significant incision, spreading the ribs, and manually accessing the affected vessel. Our technique uses advanced cardiac catheterization, combined with real-time imaging to close the ductus through a tiny incision that requires no rib spreading. Chloe leaned forward in her seat, clearly fascinated by the technical detail. Her nursing background provided sufficient medical knowledge to appreciate the complexity and innovation involved in developing such procedures. "The result," I continued, "is a procedure that takes half as long, requires no chest tube drainage, and allows most patients to return home within 24 hours instead of spending a week in the hospital." "And the success rates?" inquired Dr. Martinez from the Portland Tribune. 97% successful closure on first attempt," I replied. "Traditional open surgery has similar success rates, but with significantly higher morbidity and much longer recovery periods." Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, perhaps beginning to grasp the magnitude of what his sister had accomplished. Each statistic, every technical detail, represented innovation that extended far beyond the corporate achievements he'd built his identity around. "Dr. Harper," Jennifer Walsh continued, "how many other hospitals are implementing these techniques?" "Currently, 43 pediatric cardiac programs across North America have adopted our protocols," I answered. "We've trained surgical teams from Boston Children's Hospital, Texas Children's Hospital, Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, among others. International programs in Toronto, London, and Melbourne have also requested training workshops." The scope of influence clearly surprised several audience members. Medical innovation that achieved international adoption, represented the highest level of professional achievement, recognition that extended far beyond regional success. "What's next for the Harper wing?" asked another journalist. I smiled, feeling genuine excitement about the future developments we had planned. "We're launching a fellowship program that will train the next generation of pediatric cardiac surgeons in these techniques. Additionally, we're developing even more advanced procedures for complex congenital anomalies that are currently considered inoperable." "Inoperable cases," Dr. Rodriguez interjected with obvious interest. "Hypoplastic left heart syndrome, complex aortic arch anomalies, certain forms of tetralogy of Fallot, as listed. Conditions where traditional surgical approaches offer limited options and poor long-term outcomes. Our research suggests that modified techniques could dramatically improve survival rates for these patients." The medical professionals in the audience exchanged meaningful glances. These conditions represented some of the most challenging cases in pediatric cardiac surgery, situations where families often receive devastating prognoses and limited treatment options. "Dr. Harper," called a voice from the middle of the room, "can you tell us about your background? What led you to specialize in pediatric cardiac surgery?" I hesitated momentarily, aware that Ryan was listening intently to every word. The complete answer would reveal years of family dynamics that had no place in a professional press conference. "I've always been drawn to solving complex problems," I said carefully. "Pediatric cardiac surgery combines technical precision, innovative thinking, and the opportunity to give children full, healthy lives. When traditional approaches weren't sufficient for the outcomes we wanted to achieve, developing better techniques became essential." "And your training?" The journalist persisted. "Medical school at Johns Hopkins, residency at Boston Children's Hospital, and fellowship in pediatric cardiac surgery at Texas Children's Hospital," I recited. "I've been practicing here at Pacific Northwest Medical for 8 years, developing these techniques through collaborative research with colleagues nationwide." Tom Bradley raised his hand from his seat near the front. "Harper, as someone who initially questioned the feasibility of your proposed techniques, I want to acknowledge how completely you've revolutionized our approach to pediatric cardiac care. The outcomes speak for themselves." "Thank you, Tom," I replied warmly. "Your willingness to support innovative approaches, even when they challenged established protocols, made these developments possible." Medical advancement requires both bold ideas and institutional support. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, covering everything from funding sources to future research directions. I found myself in the familiar rhythm of academic presentation, discussing complex medical concepts with the fluency that came from years of research and practice. Ryan watched this performance with an expression that shifted between amazement and something approaching horror. Each technical question I answered competently, every professional interaction that demonstrated my expertise, further undermined his fundamental assumptions about our relative achievements. "One final question," Dr. Rodriguez announced. "Harper, what message would you like to share with families whose children might benefit from these techniques?" I considered my response carefully, thinking about the hundreds of families I'd worked with over the years, parents facing every parent's worst nightmare with courage and determination that humbled me daily. "These techniques represent hope," I said simply. "Hope that your child's surgery will be less traumatic, recovery will be faster, and long-term outcomes will be better than ever before possible. But more than that, they represent our commitment as medical professionals to never accept that current approaches are sufficient when better outcomes are achievable." The applause that followed felt different from the polite professional response that had greeted my introduction. This was recognition from colleagues who understood the years of effort required to achieve such results, acknowledgement from journalists who recognized a significant medical story, and appreciation from hospital staff who witnessed the daily impact of innovation on patient care. As the formal presentation concluded, and people began gathering for the facility tour, Ryan remained seated while others moved toward the exit. Chloe spoke quietly to him, their conversation too low to overhear but clearly intense. Jen approached the podium as I gathered my presentation materials. "Excellent job as always," he said warmly. "The questions about international adoption really highlighted the scope of impact you've achieved." "Thank you," I replied, watching Ryan finally stand and move toward us with obvious reluctance. "I think the hardest part of today might still be ahead of us. Family dynamics are often more complex than surgical procedures," Dr. Chen observed diplomatically. "But sometimes dramatic revelations create opportunities for genuine change." Ryan approached slowly, his corporate confidence replaced by uncertainty that made him appear younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen him since childhood. "Natalie," he said quietly, "could we talk privately for a few minutes?" Chloe stood beside him with an expression that suggested their quiet conversation had not gone well. Her nursing experience had undoubtedly helped her process the significance of what she'd learned about my achievements, while Ryan was still struggling with cognitive dissonance. Of course, I agreed. Dr. Chen, could you handle the facility tour? I think some family business needs to be addressed. Certainly, he replied, moving toward the group of journalists and hospital staff preparing to explore the new surgical. The three of us remained in the conference room as it emptied, surrounded by the lingering atmosphere of professional triumph and personal reckoning. Ryan's carefully constructed worldview had been thoroughly demolished, and I could see him struggling to rebuild some understanding of our family dynamics that incorporated this new reality. I don't know what to say, he began, his voice lacking its usual commanding presence. I've been wrong about everything, have you? I asked quietly, or have you been operating from assumptions that nobody ever challenged? Chloe stepped forward, her nursing training apparently providing some framework for navigating difficult conversation. Ryan, your sister is internationally recognized in her field. She's saved hundreds of children's lives. How could your family not know about this? Because we never asked, Ryan admitted, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. We made assumptions and never questioned them. We saw what we expected to see instead of finding out what was actually happening. The admission represented more self-awareness than I'd ever heard from my brother, though whether it would translate into genuine behavioral change remained to be seen. Years of ingrained family patterns couldn't be overcome through a single moment of clarity, regardless of how dramatic the catalyst. Ryan, I said gently, this isn't just about not knowing my professional achievements. It's about fundamental respect for other people's choices and lives. You've spent years dismissing my decisions because they didn't match your definition of success. I know, he said quietly, and last night, at the engagement party I humiliated you in front of everyone based on those wrong assumptions. I made myself look like an idiot, but more importantly, I hurt you in a way that was completely unjustified. Chloe watched this exchange with growing understanding of the family dynamics she was marrying into. Her expression suggested she was evaluating not just Ryan's past behavior, but his capacity for growth and change. What happens now? She asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us like a surgical instrument waiting to make the decisive incision. What happens now? Chloe's words carried the weight of a relationship at a crossroads, a family dynamic decades in the making, and professional revelations that had fundamentally altered everything we thought we knew about each other. Ryan sank into one of the conference room chairs, his expensive suit suddenly looking like a costume that no longer fit the role he was trying to play. The confident executive who had publicly mocked his unsuccessful sister 12 hours earlier had been replaced by someone grappling with the complete collapse of his understanding of reality. I need to call Mom and Dad, he said finally, pulling out his phone with trembling fingers. They need to know about this. They need to understand what we've all been missing. Do they? I asked, settling into a chair across from him. What exactly do you think has changed, Ryan? My achievements haven't altered overnight. The Harper wing didn't suddenly materialize. The surgical techniques I've developed have been saving children's lives for years. The only thing that's different is your awareness of these facts. Chloe took a seat between us, her nursing instincts clearly recognizing the need to mediate what was becoming an increasingly intense confrontation. Natalie, surely you understand how shocking this is for Ryan, for your whole family. You've been keeping your professional life completely separate from your personal relationships. Have I countered, or have I simply stopped trying to correct assumptions that my family was determined to maintain?
When someone repeatedly dismisses your career as unimportant, eventually you stop talking about it. Ryan looked up from his phone, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing anger. But you could have said something last night. When I was making that toast, when I was offering to help you financially, you knew exactly what was happening today. You let me humiliate myself in front of everyone we know. I let you reveal who you really are, I replied calmly. Your words last night weren't about my achievements or lack thereof. They were about your need to position yourself as superior, to diminish others in order to elevate your own status. Learning about my actual profession doesn't change that fundamental aspect of your character. That's not fair, Ryan protested. I was trying to be supportive in my own way. I genuinely believed you were struggling. Were you? I asked. Or were you enjoying the opportunity to showcase your success at my expense? Because there's a significant difference between private concern and public humiliation. Chloe shifted uncomfortably, clearly beginning to see patterns in Ryan's behavior that extended beyond his treatment of his sister. The man she'd agreed to marry had revealed himself to be someone who found satisfaction in publicly diminishing others, regardless of his motivations. Ryan, she said quietly,
What Natalie is saying makes sense. Last night felt cruel, even if you thought you were being helpful. The way you talked about her in front of everyone, it was designed to make you look generous and successful while making her look dependent and unsuccessful. I didn't mean it that way, Ryan insisted, but his protest lacked conviction. Deep down, he understood exactly what his behavior had revealed about his character, and the knowledge clearly disturbed him. Intent doesn't negate impact, I said gently. The fact that you might not have consciously intended to be cruel doesn't eliminate the cruelty itself. And it certainly doesn't explain 32 years of assuming the worst about my choices and capabilities. My phone buzzed with a text message from Dr. Chen. Tour going well. Several journalists want follow-up interviews. Congratulations again on an excellent presentation. The message served as a reminder that while we were having this family confrontation, the professional world was continuing to recognize and celebrate my achievements. Natalie, Ryan said, his voice taking on a pleading quality I'd never heard before. I know I've been wrong, completely wrong, but I don't understand how this happened. How did we get so disconnected that I didn't know my own sister was an internationally recognized surgeon? The question deserved an honest answer, even if the truth was uncomfortable for all of us. I considered my response carefully, thinking back over years of family interactions that had gradually eroded my willingness to share professional successes with people who seemed determined to dismiss them. Do you remember when I started medical school? I called to tell Mom and Dad that I'd been accepted to Johns Hopkins. Mom's first response was to worry about how I'd pay for it. Dad's was to suggest that maybe I should consider something more practical, like nursing or physical therapy. Chloe winced visibly, her own nursing background making her understand both the implied hierarchy and the dismissive nature of such suggestions. They discouraged you from pursuing medical school? Not exactly discouraged, I clarified, but they never expressed confidence in my ability to succeed. When I called to tell them I'd matched for residency at Boston Children's Hospital, Mom asked if I was sure I was ready for such a demanding program. When I published my first research paper, Dad wondered if I shouldn't focus more on clinical work instead of wasting time on theoretical studies. Ryan listened with growing discomfort, perhaps recognizing similar patterns in his own interactions with me. But you never told us about your successes. The wing, the international recognition, the lives you've saved. I tried early on, I said. When I completed my fellowship, I called to share the news. Ryan, you cut the conversation short because you had a client dinner. When I received my first research grant, I mentioned it at Christmas dinner. The response was polite indifference followed by 20 minutes of discussion about your latest promotion. The memories were more painful than I'd expected, each one representing a moment when I'd reached out for family support and received distracted acknowledgement at best. Over time, I'd learned to find validation elsewhere, from colleagues who understood the significance of my work and patients whose lives I'd improved. We were interested, Ryan protested weakly. We just didn't understand the medical stuff. You didn't try to understand, I correct. When I mentioned developing new surgical techniques, nobody asked what that meant or why it mattered. When I talked about conference presentations, the subject got changed to something more relatable. Eventually, I stopped trying to include family in my professional life. Chloe leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. That's why you live so modestly. It's not because you're not successful financially. It's because your values are completely different from your family's definition of success. Exactly, every consulting fee, every patent licensing payment, every honorarium from speaking engagements gets reinvested into research or donated to programs that provide cardiac surgery for underserved populations. Material possessions have never been how I measure achievement, but the apartment, the car, Ryan said desperately, clinging to his original assumptions. If you're making good money, why not live better? I live exactly as well as I choose to live, I replied. My apartment is comfortable, well located, and adequate for my needs. My car is reliable and efficient. Beyond that, every dollar I don't spend on luxury items is a dollar that can fund research that might save a child's life. That's my definition of living well. The fundamental difference in our value systems had never been more apparent. Ryan measured success through external markers designed to impress others, while I found satisfaction in professional achievement that directly benefited people who desperately needed help. Ryan, Chloe said softly, do you understand what this means? Your sister has probably saved more lives than most doctors save in entire careers. She's developed techniques that are being used around the world. She's built a legacy that will continue helping children long after she retires. I understand, Ryan said, though his tone suggested he was still struggling with the implications. I just don't understand why she never made us understand. Why she let us think she was unsuccessful when she was actually more successful than any of. Because success that requires constant explanation isn't really success at all, I said quietly. My work speaks for itself to the people who matter in my professional life. I shouldn't have to justify my career choices to family members who are determined to see them as inadequate. A long silence stretched between us as Ryan processed this response. Outside the conference room windows, I could see hospital staff moving through the corridors, continuing their daily work of caring for patients and saving lives. The normal operations of the hospital served as a reminder that this family drama was taking place against the backdrop of something much larger and more important. What happens with Mom and Dad? Ryan asked. Finally. They still think you're struggling financially. They worry about you constantly. Do they worry about me? I asked. Or do they worry about their perception of me? Because there's a significant difference between genuine concern for someone's well-being and anxiety about family members who don't conform to expected patterns of success. Chloe's phone buzzed with what was probably a message from her supervisor, wondering where she was during her scheduled shift. The normal demands of her nursing career provided a stark contrast to the family crisis unfolding in the conference room. I need to get back to work, she said reluctantly. But Ryan, we need to talk more about this, about what it means for us, for our relationship, for how you treat the people closest to you. The implications were Chloe's professional background had given her immediate appreciation for my achievements, while simultaneously revealing troubling aspects of Ryan's character that she was now being forced to confront. Don't leave, Ryan said desperately. Not like this, not when everything is falling apart. Nothing is falling apart, I said firmly. Reality is being revealed, which is completely different. The question is what you choose to do with accurate information about your family and yourself. Ryan's phone rang, displaying our mother's contact information. He stared at it for several rings before finally answering. Hi Mom, Margaret Harper's voice carried clearly through the phone's speaker, her tone carrying the familiar mixture of concern and disappointment that had characterized her interactions with me for decades. Ryan. Dear, I've been thinking about last night. Perhaps we were too harsh with Natalie. She seemed upset when she left. Mom, Ryan said, his voice cracking slightly, we need to talk about Natalie, about everything we thought we knew. What do you mean? Margaret's tone shifted to the worried pitch she reserved for family crises. Is something wrong? Is Natalie in trouble? Ryan looked at me with an expression that begged for guidance on how to explain the magnitude of our family's collective mess. I remained silent, allowing him to find his own words for a conversation that was long overdue. Mom, Natalie isn't unsuccessful, he began slowly. She's not struggling financially. She's not a failure at anything. Of course she's not a failure, dear, Margaret replied with practiced maternal diplomacy. She's just finding her way, that's all. No, Mom, Ryan said, more firmly. She's an internationally recognized surgeon. She's developed surgical techniques that are being used around the world. She has a wing of the hospital named after her. She's saved hundreds of children's lives. The silence that followed stretched so long that Ryan checked his phone to make sure the call hadn't been dropped. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. What are you talking about? I'm at Pacific Northwest Medical Center, Ryan continued, his voice gaining strength as he committed to full disclosure. There's a press conference happening right now about the Harper Pediatric Cardiac Wing, named after Natalie. She's presenting her research to medical journalists from around the country. That's impossible, Margaret said, but uncertainty had replaced her initial dismissal. Natalie would have told us about something that important. Would she? Ryan asked. When was the last time any of us asked her about her work without dismissing it as unimportant? When did we last show genuine interest in her career instead of offering unsolicited advice about finding something more stable? The question hung in the air as Margaret processed implications that clearly challenged her fundamental understanding of her younger daughter's life. In the background, I could hear Robert asking what was wrong, his voice carrying the confused concern of someone overhearing half of a conversation that made no sense. Ryan, Margaret said finally, are you absolutely certain about this? Natalie is a surgeon. A successful surgeon. More than successful, Mom, Ryan replied, looking directly at me as he spoke. She's revolutionized pediatric cardiac surgery. She's trained doctors from the best hospitals in the country. She's internationally famous in her field. Chloe watched this conversation with fascination, clearly understanding that she was witnessing a family reckoning decades in the making. Her nursing experience had exposed her to many family dynamics, but this level of fundamental misunderstanding was probably unprecedented in her professional experience. "I don't understand," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "How could we not know? How could she not tell us?" "Because we never listened," Ryan answered, the admission seeming to surprise him with its honesty. "We assumed she was unsuccessful based on our own narrow definition of success. And we never bothered to learn what she was actually doing with her life." The conversation continued for several more minutes, as Ryan attempted to explain the morning's revelations to increasingly shocked parents. I listened to this unprecedented display of honesty from my brother while considering what these revelations might mean for our family's future. Change was possible, but it required sustained effort and genuine commitment to different ways of interacting. Whether the Harper family possessed the emotional maturity for that kind of transformation remained to be seen, but for the first time in decades, honest conversation was actually happening. 3 months after the dedication ceremony, I stood in the Harper Pediatric Cardiac Wing's main surgical suite, preparing for what would become one of the most challenging cases of my career. 8-week-old Isabella Martinez had been transferred from a hospital in Sacramento after local surgeons declared her complex heart defect inoperable. Her parents Maria and Carlos had driven through the night, clinging to the hope that the techniques developed in our facility might save their daughter's life. The surgical team moved around me with practiced efficiency, as we prepared for the 4-hour procedure that would reconstruct Isabella's malformed aortic arch. These moments before complex surgery always brought a familiar mixture of focused calm and intense responsibility. Every decision, every movement of my instruments, would determine whether this child would grow up healthy or whether her family would face an unimaginable loss. Sarah Kim, the resident who had thanked me during the wing's opening day, assisted with the precision that had impressed me throughout her training program. "Dr. Harper, the imaging shows clear access through the intercostal approach. Are we proceeding with the modified technique?" "Yes," I confirmed, reviewing the final diagnostic images one more time. "The traditional approach would require too much chest wall disruption for an infant this small. We'll use the minimally invasive protocol with real-time cardiac catheterization guide." As we began the procedure, I found my thoughts drifting briefly to the changes that had unfolded in my family relationships since that confrontational morning in the hospital corridor. The transformation hadn't been immediate or simple, but it had been genuine in ways that surprised me. Ryan had called every week since the dedication ceremony, initially with awkward attempts at conversation that gradually evolved into genuine interest in my work. He'd started asking specific questions about my patients, my research, and the international programs that had adopted our technique. The change felt tentative but authentic, as if he was genuinely trying to understand the sister he'd never bothered to know. Margaret and Robert had driven down from Seattle 2 weeks after learning the truth, arriving at my apartment with expressions of bewilderment and something approaching shame. The conversation had been difficult but necessary, with decades of accumulated misunderstanding finally being acknowledged and addressed. My mother had cried when she realized how many achievements she'd missed, how many moments of pride she'd forfeited through willful ignorance of her daughter's actual life. The surgical monitor beeped steadily as Isabella's tiny heart continued functioning despite the complex reconstruction taking place around it. This was why I did this work, why every family dinner conversation and corporate success story paled in comparison to the opportunity to save a life that everyone else had written off as hopeless. "Excellent visualization, Dr. Harper," Kim observed as we approached the most delicate portion of the procedure. "The catheter placement is perfect." "Thank you," I replied, making microscopic adjustments to the positioning. "Remember, at this stage, patience is more important than speed. We have time to ensure perfect placement before committing to the reconstruction." Chloe had perhaps handled the revelations better than anyone else in my family, though she'd also had the most dramatic adjustment to make in her personal life. She'd postponed the wedding, insisting that she needed time to fully understand the man she was planning to marry. Their relationship had entered what she diplomatically called a period of reassessment, during which Ryan was forced to examine not just his treatment of me, but his fundamental approach to valuing and respecting other people. The aortic reconstruction proceeded flawlessly, each step building toward the moment when Isabella's repaired heart would begin functioning normally for the first time in her short life. These procedures never felt routine, regardless of how many similar cases I'd handled. Each child represented a unique challenge, a family's entire world hanging in the balance. "Dr. Harper," called a voice from the observation gallery above the surgical suite. I glanced up to see Tom Bradley watching the procedure with several visiting surgeons from other pediatric programs. The Harper Wing had become a destination for medical professionals wanting to learn advanced techniques, bringing colleagues from across the country to observe our methods firsthand. "How are we doing?" Tom asked through the intercom system. "Reconstruction complete," I replied. "Beginning the final phase of the procedure. We're preparing to assess cardiac function and close." The moment when we removed the catheter and allowed Isabella's heart to function independently never failed to provide profound satisfaction. The monitors showed immediate improvement in cardiac output, and her vital signs stabilized at levels that indicated successful repair. "Beautiful work," Dr. Kim said softly. "Her parents are going to be so relieved." "They are," I agreed, beginning the closing procedure. "And Isabella is going to have a completely normal childhood, thanks to techniques that didn't exist 5 years ago." As we completed the surgery and prepared to update the Martinez family on their daughter's successful procedure, I reflected on how profoundly my life had changed since that confrontational morning 3 months earlier. The Harper Wing was exceeding all projections for patient outcomes and surgical volume. The fellowship program had attracted applications from residents nationwide, and our research continued advancing the field of pediatric cardiac surgery. But perhaps more significantly, the family dynamics that had shaped 32 years of my life had finally begun evolving towards something resembling mutual respect and genuine understanding. It hadn't been easy, and the changes remained fragile, but progress was undeniable. Ryan had surprised me most of all. His initial shock and embarrassment had gradually transformed into what seemed like genuine pride in my achievements. He'd started mentioning my work in his corporate social circles, no longer positioning himself as the family's sole success story. The transformation felt authentic, though I remained cautiously optimistic about its permanence. "Dr. Harper," said a nurse, approaching with a message slip, "there's someone here to see you when you're finished. Says he's your brother." I glanced at the clock, noting that it was mid-afternoon on a Tuesday. Ryan should have been in corporate meetings or client presentations, not visiting his sister at the hospital during peak business hour. "Tell him I'll be out in 20 minutes, I replied, completing the final documentation for Isabella's procedure. "Has he been waiting long?" "About an hour," the nurse replied. "He seems anxious to speak with you." After changing out of my surgical attire, I found Ryan in the family waiting area near the Harper Wing's main entrance. He looked uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with his phone and checking his watch repeatedly. When he saw me approaching, he stood with an expression that suggested he had something important to discuss. "Ryan," I said, noting his obvious agitation, "what's wrong? Is everything okay with Mom and Dad?" "They're fine," he assured me quickly. "Actually, they're better than fine. Dad's been telling everyone at the country club about his daughter, the famous heart surgeon. Mom joined some charity board for pediatric cardiac research. They're both incredibly proud of you." "Then what's wrong?" I asked, settling into a chair across from him in the quiet waiting area. "You look like you haven't slept in days." Ryan took a deep breath, gathering himself for what was obviously a difficult conversation. "Chloe broke up with me," he said finally, "called off the engagement completely, said she couldn't marry someone whose character had been so thoroughly revealed as lacking in basic human decency." The news wasn't entirely surprising, given the strain I'd observed in their relationship since the dedication ceremony. Chloe's nursing background had given her immediate appreciation for the significance of my work, while simultaneously exposing troubling patterns in Ryan's behavior that extended far beyond his treatment of family members. "I'm sorry," I said, and meant, despite everything, I didn't take pleasure in my brother's pain. "Are you?" Ryan asked, his voice carrying genuine curiosity rather than accusation. "Because I've been thinking about this for weeks, and I realized that everything she said was absolutely correct. I am someone who finds satisfaction in diminishing others to elevate myself. I do lack basic human decency in how I treat people who don't serve my immediate interests." The level of self-awareness in his statement surprised me. The Ryan I'd grown up with had never demonstrated such capacity for introspection or acknowledgement of personal failings. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've started therapy, trying to understand why I developed these patterns of behavior. I've been reading about emotional intelligence and healthy relationship dynamics, but honestly, I'm not sure if fundamental personality change is possible at 35. It's possible, I said gently, but it requires sustained effort and genuine commitment to becoming different than you've been. The question is whether you want to change for yourself, or whether you're just trying to win Chloe back. Ryan considered this question for several moments before responding. Both initially, he said honestly, but the more I've learned about myself through therapy, the more I realize that the person I've been isn't someone I actually like or respect. Chloe was right to leave. I wouldn't want to be married to someone like me. The admission represented more growth than I'd ever expected from my brother. His willingness to examine his own behavior honestly and accept responsibility for its consequences suggested the possibility of genuine transformation. Ryan, I said carefully, change is possible, but it takes time. Years, not months. And it requires accepting that you might lose relationships that can't be repaired, while building new ones based on healthier patterns. I know, he replied. My therapist said something similar, that I need to focus on becoming the kind of person I want to be, rather than trying to convince people to accept the person I've been. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching hospital staff move through the corridors around us. The normal operations of the medical center continued while we processed years of family dysfunction and the possibility of genuine healing. Natalie, Ryan said finally, I want to apologize, not just for the engagement party, but for 32 years of dismissing your achievements, minimizing your choices, and treating you as less capable and less valuable than I am. You deserved better from your family, and especially from your older brother. The apology felt genuine in a way that surprised me. Thank you, I said simply. That means more than you probably realize. I also want to ask if there's any way I can support your work, he continued. I know I can't undo decades of being a terrible brother, but maybe I can contribute to something that actually matters instead of just focusing on corporate profits. There are always funding opportunities for pediatric cardiac research, I replied thoughtfully. Grants that support surgical training programs, equipment purchases for hospitals that serve underinsured populations, research into even more advanced techniques. I'd like to help with that, Ryan said. Whatever I can contribute financially, and whatever corporate connections might be useful for fundraising efforts. The offer felt sincere, though I remained cautiously optimistic about his ability to sustain such commitment over time. Real change required consistency over years, not dramatic gestures in moments of crisis. My pager buzzed with a message from Dr. Chen about Isabella Martinez's post-operative progress. I need to check on a patient, I said, standing to leave. But Ryan, I'm glad you came by. This conversation gives me hope for our relationship. Me too, he replied, also standing. And Natalie, I want you to know that regardless of what happens with the rest of my life, I'm genuinely proud to be your brother. I always should have been, but I'm especially proud now that I finally understand what that actually means. As I walked back toward the Harper wing to check on Isabella's recovery, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought my family to this point of honest communication and mutual respect. The dedication ceremony had been a catalyst, but real transformation had required sustained effort from everyone involved. Isabella was sleeping peacefully in the pediatric cardiac intensive care unit, her vital signs indicating excellent recovery from the morning's complex surgery. Her parents sat beside her bed, holding hands and watching their daughter breathe normally for the first time since her birth. Dr. Harper, Maria Martinez said softly, "Thank you for giving us hope when everyone else said there wasn't any. Thank you for trusting us with Isabella's care," I replied. "She's going to have a completely healthy, normal child." Standing in that hospital room, watching a family reunited with their healthy child, I understood once again why I'd chosen this career path despite the years of family misunderstanding and professional challenges. Some forms of success couldn't be measured in corporate titles or suburban mansions. They could only be measured in lives saved, families preserved, and hope restored when everything seemed lost. The Harper family had finally learned to measure success the same way, and that transformation had been worth waiting 32 years to achieve. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.